when the ancient Greeks went back to Egypt, they asked the Egyptian priest cults what was civilization like a long time ago. And they said that in the previous 10,000 years, they had major devastating events. These were the type that crushed their civilization. Not wars, not pestilence, but dramatic physical events that literally crushed their civilization back into the cave ages. And we see the devastation in cities in South America, ancient cities, that are now being discovered, which were obviously destroyed by massive earthquake-type situations. Earth definitely, without question, has had major earth changes that have destroyed entire civilizations, and the indication is that it was not that long ago. The concept of a pole shift, in other words, the Earth moving its either magnetic or physical pole, has come up many times when we hear people talking about Planet X. Mountain ranges would form, oceans would form huge tides, and this would not be something you'd want to face in everyday life. It would be a very violent event.
There's evidence that in the past, such as the Ice Age and mastodons being frozen instantly with still undigested food in their stomach, all over the earth, there is evidence that in the past we have had polar shifts or some type of cataclysmic event on Earth which happens in cycles over time.
If this is in fact true, there would have to be evidence of these passages, ecological evidence, archaeological evidence that shows the calamitous events that transpired during each passage.
Our Earth gives evidence that we have had periodic pole shifts. There's mountain building in and of itself is evidence. These mountains are like pushed together. If you're in an airplane and you look down at foothills, for instance, it almost looks like a rumpled blanket, like somebody took a blanket and pushed it and rumpled it. Mountains are forced upwards with great masses of rocks snapping. This is signs of great pressure, not the gentle squeezing and pushing that happens with earthquakes at all. Indeed, our Earth has had these periodic pole shifts. You can see that in the evidence of the Earth. Go back every time period and you can see other changes during these passages. And when we have pole shifts and violent geological earthquakes and changes and the like, shifting of the tipping of the Earth and shifting of the crust, volcanoes explode. And when they do, there's a lot of molten lava pouring out. Well, lava, being molten, will line up with the current magnetic field. And when lava hardens, that's a permanent freeze, indicating the direction of magnetism at that moment in time. Well, this is one way that they have determined the wandering pole theory, where they've identified places in Earth where they say at one time this appears to have been the North Pole, or that appeared to have been the South Pole, is through this frozen lava alignment. For instance, off of Japan, there's cities and roads that they find under the water. In Bermuda, we see roads and walls and the like. Likewise, land can rise. Atlantis is rumored to be a continent that went under the waves during one of these cataclysmic passages.
Back around 1650 BC, or if you want to give it a little more leeway, between 1500 and 1700 BC, there is considerable evidence for a calamitous event. In fact, there are stories from that time showing certain civilizations came and went, certain powers that be were overthrown at the time because of the celestial events that were happening and the earth changes that were happening.
The last passage was during the Jewish Exodus, approximately 3,600 years ago. Nobody knows for sure the exact date, because during these passages, mankind is just discombobulated. They stop keeping records. Records are lost, so nobody can exactly pinpoint the date.
There is a pattern to the cataclysms on Earth. If we go back every 3,600-year period, we see that some major world catastrophe happened. There are other changes happening in the solar system. One such theory says that cow flatulence, believe it or not, is responsible for depleting our ozone layer, which leads to our polar caps melting. But what about Mars? What about Mars's polar caps. They seem to be melting as well. There are many changes happening in the solar system. So what would be influencing our entire solar system as a whole, not just Earth? Observations are being made, and with little notice to the public. This article from CNN tells of a potential killer comet detected with only weeks of warning. In recent times, new planets and outer solar bodies are being discovered and observed. With so much sky to observe, it's no wonder we have so many last-minute reports of potential near misses. Or could there be more that is being downplayed in the media or withheld altogether?
There are a lot of probes that we send to Mars or to the outer planets to do imaging, which could also have black ops projects attached to them that the public isn't going to know about. So if we send an orbiter to Mars to do a main mapping mission, it might have other black ops projects attached to that satellite collecting its own data that we're just not going to know about. And if they need to take into a full account the main mapping mission or take over that project for their own purposes, that satellite is gone. It becomes a black project. And people aren't aware of those facts.
The observatories around the world, many of them are very aware, acutely aware, and very worried about this inbound planet.
You really need to look at what's happening, the weather irregularities, the changes in the Earth, and think of it in terms of these periodic passages and make up your own mind.
We don't have to have a collision for something to affect us. It can affect us at a distance. It could be on the other side of the sun, have a very large discharge into the sun. The sun could erupt with a full coronal discharge, which means it would come off in all directions from the sun, and we would be very affected. Our weather would be very affected, and this new object, Planet X or whatever you would call it, would be very far away from Earth. So the thing I want to stress is that you do not need a direct collision with something to be affected. The government agencies, they are basically under contract not to tell you anything. The scientists have signed non-disclosure agreements. Basically, they're under a gag order. It is impossible to go to a scientist and get a news release directly. You have to go through an official news release agency, and they would give you information that has been blended and made nice for you. They would put out possibly a web page that is equivalent of third-grade information, and hope that the general public takes this as the information that came out of NASA. When they have all this sophisticated equipment and incredible amounts of information, and today's populace is very sophisticated and intelligent and well-educated, it's really an insult, the information that they're putting.